This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly flagship show Marijuana Today, as well as the weekly shows Weed Wonks and Green Rush, which you can find over at weedwonks.com and greenrushpodcast.net. To advertise to the best audience in legal marijuana, just email me at shay@mjtodaymedia.com to get started as a sponsor. That's shay@mjtodaymedia.com, with Shay spelled S-H-E-A. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Monday, March 9th, 2020, and you're tuned in to episode 900 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. We lead the day off with a global headline as the ongoing coronavirus has prompted the cancellation on Friday of the upcoming South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas. The annual technology, film, and music festival draws in hundreds of thousands of people each year for 2 weeks of events and has embraced in recent years legal cannabis by building out a special track for marijuana-related programs. This year, we were actually slated to record an episode of our weekly show, Marijuana Today, on stage out at South by Southwest, in addition to lots of other great marijuana-related content. So that's a bummer, but obviously it's better to not be involved with helping to spread this virus. I think the bigger story here is obviously the advancing coronavirus, which is continuing to disrupt things all over. The fact that we have a cruel, addled, idiot dictator leading the U.S. response to this crisis does not make me feel super confident. So wash your hands and pay attention to things. Zach Harris has an interesting story out of Utah, as on March 1st, the state's first legal medical marijuana dispensary opened its doors in Salt Lake City. And as Zach picked up on, the crowds that first day were less than overwhelming, ticking in at a total of 16 customers. The next day, the dispensary Dragon Wellness saw just one customer. The problem in Utah is the strict design of the state's medical marijuana program, which puts up all kinds of hoops for patients to jump through before they can even step foot into a dispensary. Hong Nguyen, co-owner of Dragonfly Wellness, contacted state lawmakers as soon as she noticed the drop-off in customers, asking that they pass emergency legislation allowing hopeful patients the ability to buy medical marijuana as soon as they get a letter of recommendation from a doctor, rather than having to wait until the state reviews their application and then sends them a card, as is done now. As KUTV is reporting, there is now motion for that legislation, but we'll have to see how it all plays out. Our final top story this fine Monday morning is a good one out of Virginia, where lawmakers on Sunday passed a piece of legislation to the desk of Governor Ralph Northam to strip criminal penalties for marijuana possession. We've touched on this one recently as the bill was passed by the state's two legislative bodies in versions different enough to require some conference committeeing. The bill, HB 972, if signed into law by Governor Northam, as is expected, will make the possession of up to an ounce of marijuana punishable by no more than a $25 fine. Whereas right now you can be tossed into jail for 30 days and fined $500 for even having just a little bit of marijuana in the state of Virginia. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz it in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly flagship show, Marijuana Today, as well as the weekly show, Weed Wonks and Green Rush, which you can find over at weedwonks.com and greenrushpodcast.net. It's that last show, the Green Rush, that I'm going to talk to you about here today. If you've not tuned into the Green Rush podcast yet, hosted by my friends Louis Goldberg and Ann Donahoe, then you are doing yourself a disservice, because it is absolutely a must-subscribe marijuana industry podcast. And I say that acknowledging my deep bias here as the show's producer. But what I love about the Green Rush podcast is how beautifully it fits in with all the other shows that we make here at MJ Today Media, because no one is covering the legal cannabis industry like Ann and Louis are. They're both professionals in the worlds of public relations with an especial focus on finance and investors and that whole world. So the conversations they have with people like Alan Brochstein of 420 Investor, venture capitalist Emily Paxia, and even boxing legend and marijuana entrepreneur Mike Tyson are all fascinating. You'll be a better legal marijuana operator for being a Green Rush listener. Just open up greenrushpodcast.net or search the term Green Rush wherever you get your podcasts to give a listen and subscribe. That's greenrushpodcast.net. All right, time for the Blitz. News station KGTV out of San Diego, California recently published a story looking at the safety of illicit market vaporizers, where they worked with a local legal vaporizer company which collected for testing a sampling of illicit market vape carts from customers by offering them a discount if they swapped out their carts bought from non-licensed dealers. As we've seen before in cases like this, the vast majority of the tested illicit cartridges were contaminated enough with pesticides and other harmful chemicals that they would have failed to make it through to the legal market. There was also huge disparities found in the amount of THC in the non-licensed cartridges, as well as a high percentage of the cutting agent vitamin E acetate, now pegged by the government as the major cause of vape-related health problems. The Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission just approved 34 new provisional licenses late last week, including one that came with a condition that the business rethink its name. Some commission members were worried that the Magic Dragon Dispensary would appeal to children, given its obvious connection to the story of Puff the Magic Dragon. I think our industry has an inordinate amount of interesting storylines involving the naming of products and businesses, which I would file this one under. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration just issued a report in which it admitted that state-level legal marijuana was reducing the amount of illicit interstate trafficking. Kyle Yeager over Marijuana Moment sussed this one out, noticing a bit of text within a DEA budget performance report issued to Congress that talked about how the passage of legal medical marijuana in Florida affected the illicit market. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance here, so I'd suggest opening this one up for the full read if it catches your attention. It's certainly not breaking news that legalizing drugs hurts the illicit market, but it is nice to hear about the federal government whenever they accidentally admit it. Rhode Island is expected to triple the number of its medical marijuana dispensaries from just 3 to 9. The state says licenses will be awarded by the Department of Business Regulation via lottery. Zip over to WPRI via Marijuana Business Daily for more here. Kyle has another headline on the day with news that the heads of 50 state banking associations sent a letter to Senate leaders on Friday asking that they pass the Safe Banking Act, which would fully remove the threat of penalties for banks and financial institutions to work with legal marijuana operators. The legislation was passed by the House last year, but currently sits in Senator Moscow Mitch's Republican legislative graveyard in the Senate. The letter to senators reads in part, quote, although there are admittedly broader public policy questions at play, we ask that you evaluate and address this pressing banking problem, which is within your power to resolve. Doing so will reap immediate public safety, tax, and regulatory benefits while Congress continues to grapple with broader decisions about national drug policy, unquote. Deborah Borchardt, writing over at Real Money today, checks back in on how the change by Canadian marijuana giant Canopy growth from a focus on highly built-out indoor cultivation space to much cheaper outdoor grows will affect the rest of the cannabis market. We reported on this one just last week as Canopy closed down 2 huge greenhouses and canceled the opening of a planned third. It seems to be part of an ongoing industry shakedown in Canada, where demand for legal cannabis is about the same as the entire state of California. This is another story that I would suggest reading today. Today's final top story is a check back in on a storyline that spooled up just last week in New York City, where police were filmed the gang beating a young black man, now identified as 20-year-old Fitzroy Gale, before arresting him for resisting arrest and the possession of marijuana. Video was first posted of the interaction, which started off with Mr. Gale being held against a wall by a plainclothes police officer who would not tell him what he was being detained for. Soon after the video starts, other police officers join in on the fray and then beat and tackle Mr. Gale before arresting him. His mother found out about the incident soon after when the filmed encounter went viral. A high-ranking police officer said that the video, quote, concerns me, unquote, though none of the officers involved have been suspended or placed on modified duty in any way. Best of luck to Mr. Gale and his family in making this one painful to the NYPD via the courts. I won't hold my breath that the actual police will do anything about it. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again tomorrow morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, MJ Today Media, and to our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on the big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with Marijuana Today.
One take, Shay. One take.